Hey there, folks. Welcome to the Jason Wright Show. So I have thought about investing in Bitcoin for years. I've never done it. It's always kind of been one of these things. I just didn't even want to learn about Bitcoin or any form of cryptocurrency because I didn't want to go there. I'm old school, but I thought it always makes sense to educate yourself. And to that end, I was fortunate enough to have someone from Beau Turner's team reach out to me. So who is Beau Turner, you might ask? Well, he is the founder and CEO of Abundant Minds. Beau Turner is the founder of Abundant Minds, a Bitcoin mining company built with one purpose: to make passive crypto infrastructure investing simple, secure, and suitable. A former real estate investor, Turner turned tech entrepreneur, Beau launched Abundant Minds after experiencing firsthand how unreliable, opaque, and frustrating the mining space could be. What began as a personal mission has since evolved into a premium service that provides white glove support, transparent operations, and renewable energy hosting in the Pacific Northwest. From due diligence through deployment, Beau and his team manage every detail so investors can benefit from mining without having to become miners themselves. His passion extends beyond returns. He helps clients understand the bigger shifts in finance, energy, and technology that make Bitcoin mining one of the most timely opportunities of this era. His mission is to demystify the space, bring clarity where others create confusion, and build long-term value through infrastructure most investors have never had access to. And oh, by the way, did I mention Beau is a fellow SMU Mustang? Pony up. Didn't know that until we got to talking today. And I think if you've never invested in Bitcoin, but you wanted to understand kind of, even if you don't want to, you just want to understand what it means to mine for Bitcoin. You want to understand these data centers that you keep hearing about that are popping up everywhere. What's going on? Or you had some buddy that set up a Bitcoin mine and drained all the electricity from a building and shut things down and blew a circuit or something like that. You've heard these crazy stories. What the heck was going on? This is a great conversation to get. What I told Beau, I was like, man, just kind of make this a Bitcoin 101 for me and for my audience. I found it very beneficial, very insightful. I hope you enjoy it. And by the way, if you're listening to this on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts, please leave a 5-star rating. If you find it useful, if you learn something, share it with people, please. And if you happen to be watching this on the YouTube channel, please click like or subscribe, leave comments, leave questions. And without further ado, here is my conversation with Beau Turner. Thanks for listening. Beau Turner, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks so much for having me, Jason.
Absolutely. And before we even get started, I got to say, pony up. I'm so pumped to find out that you're a fellow Mustang.
You know, you run into people all over the place, and it's unbelievable how often you find people that are 1 degree of separation, this close connection, all this overlapping. I mean, it's such a big world, but you have so many opportunities to connect with people who've had similar experiences and done similar things, and I just think that's the coolest thing.
I could not agree more. And like we were talking about, that's the best part of this podcast is that I get to do that all the time. And, I mean, gosh, you and I maybe talked for, it felt like 5-6 minutes before I hit record. And we learned that, I've got an oldest daughter that went to Alabama. You're from Alabama. Then the SMU connection, background in real estate. There's just so many things. And also just kind of as a general point of topic, and I want to make sure that we plug your podcast while we're here, is that for people out there that they think that, well, unless you're going to be Joe Rogan or Tim Ferriss, there's no reason to start a podcast. Well, Beau and I beg to differ. We both realized, and just kind of trading stories about how this is one of the most amazing ways to meet some of the most amazing people that you never would have met otherwise. And so like I mentioned to you also, I'm like, welcome to the crazy Jason Wright Show ecosystem, brother. I'm glad to have you here and look forward to getting to know you better. And with that, let's get started, man. All right, I told you before we even started that I am going to come off very ignorant because I am totally ignorant to cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, mining, all of it. I know the bits and pieces. I know it conceptually. I have no Bitcoin in my I don't have any cryptocurrency in my portfolio. I don't have a hard bias against it. It's just as the older that I get, man, I try to follow the Buffett all the way back to the Peter Lynch rule. If I don't invest in things I don't understand, I do not understand cryptocurrency. And so, what I want this audience to know today, folks, this is going to be like you and I taking a coaching call with an expert that in the form of Beau Turner to kind of give us an understanding of what mining for Bitcoin is, what the data centers are, what all the terms that are thrown around a lot, Beau. I want you to really kind of make this, crypto for dummies. But before we get there, I do want to know your origin story. I teased out a little bit of it, where you went to school, you're from Alabama, and now you're in Oregon. I didn't mention that. So just kind of talk about how your entrepreneurial journey, which by the way, I always love to learn kind of the hero's journey that is that entrepreneur arc that happens in guys like mine in your lives, that we decided at some point we wanted to go out there and take the pick and the axe and go kind of chop wood and carry water for ourselves. So how does yours begin, and just kind of take us through that, and then we'll get into the whole crypto mining deal.
That sounds great. Well, first off, thanks for having me, Jason. I'm
You
really
welcome.
looking forward to this. For people that aren't familiar with me, most people would know me as the Bitcoin miner who sold all of his real estate after being a real estate investor for about a decade to get into mining, and that being kind of a crazy story for most people, or a crazy idea for most people. I've built our company, Abundant Minds, into an eight-figure company over the last few years. I would say that we're one of, if not the leading Bitcoin mining company in the world. We serve hundreds of clients all around the world and help them acquire Bitcoin in the most tax efficient, energy efficient, hands off way that they possibly can. And the way that we got here was, like probably most people's entrepreneurial story, a little bit unconventional. And it was that I had been exposed to Bitcoin for several years, but had never gotten in mining. And my wife and I saw Bitcoin mining as one of the greatest and probably most underappreciated and even vilified in a lot of places opportunities that's out there. And our first venture into the space, unfortunately, lined up pretty well with what people think about. And that was that we got in with a partner and lost $500,000 of our own money as our first mining experience. So we got burned by a bad partnership. And instead of walking away after that experience, we looked around and realized that there were thousands of other people who were just like us, who were sitting on the sidelines for really similar reasons. Either they'd already been scammed, they were afraid of being scammed, they knew someone who'd been scammed or had a bad experience. And so we essentially built Abundant Minds to fix that. And what I'm really passionate about in this space that we may or may not get into is, at a deeper level, helping people to create abundance in their lives. And I think that the people who win in the next decade will be the ones who genuinely understand two really fundamental things, things that we all touch and interact with every day, but very few of us ever take the time to examine. And those things are energy and money, how they interact, how they're evolving together, how the shifts in those two things are impacting everything from computing to finance and AI. It's all connected. And beyond building the business and doing what we do for investors, I spend a lot of time educating investors on how to think about the world that we live in. Because personally, back in 2020, I felt completely lost. Like the world was changing far faster than any of my existing mental models could handle. At the time, I was a full time real estate investor. And I just hated that feeling. And I don't want anybody else to feel that way and feel stuck when the map is totally available to you and you can have the experience of riding the wave of change rather than getting swallowed up by it. So that's a quick backstory.
I love it, and it opens the door to talk about some of the things I can tell, and I just noticed while you were saying that, you've got "buy back your time" over your shoulder there, so just those little hints, those little kinda silent salesmen, if you will, that are around you like that, lets me know that we definitely share an understanding, and then let's kinda double click on this a little bit about with regard to entrepreneurship and abundance and money and energy as currencies of sorts.
Mhm.
I think that that's one of the things a lot of people miss about entrepreneurship in general is that if I once was speaking in a university class, lecturing these undergrads, and I'll never forget this girl. She asked me a question about money. You know, how do you, if you wanted to basically get into private equity and go, create, I don't know, quarter of a billion, whatever, fill in the number of wealth, what would you do? And I said, well, the first thing I'd tell you, if you ever decide to be an entrepreneur and the first goal is some sort of arbitrary figure, you're going to fail miserably. You're going to be really miserable. It's not about that. It's about a blueprint for life and being able to get the life you wanted and curated first, and then finding the things that fit within that. And it sounds to me like that's kind of the journey you were more on, rather than being like, and by the way, have you seen PE guy on Instagram? This Johnny Hildebrand guy that does, oh, dude, you've got to check it out. And the only reason why I mention it is because he like pokes fun at all the PE bros, and there's always like he's always talking about his portfolio and how much crypto he has, and it's really hilarious. And as someone who plays in the PE space, we and all my buddies that are in private equity, we all think it's freaking hilarious. It's awesome. But that's kind of the caricature, right? But really, whenever you start to dig into what really matters most, it's about first of all managing time, which is the most valuable non-renewable resource any of us have. It's about time with, I love that you've already mentioned your wife, that she partnered with you in this kind of this concept. So just talk a little bit more about that for the audience who is out there thinking, I may want to start a business, I may want to buy a business, and just peel back the onion on how being an entrepreneur has lent to you being able to live a more fulfilled life. And also, when you say abundance, I already know just from the short time we've spoken, when you say abundance, that doesn't just mean a pile of cash in the bank account and being able to, fly private and whatever. It means something different. So kind of let's unpack that a little bit.
God, there's so many different routes we can go down with this. I'm blessed to have really good influences in my life, and one of them being Dan. I don't get anything for plugging his book, but I spent last week with him, and it's changed my life. So I think anything Dan Martell is great. On the abundance piece, I'm lucky to have been influenced by Dr. Joe Dispenza a lot, and he has actually a course on abundance uh, that anybody should check out. It's just a great piece of media. But the very opening of that course is, how do we define abundance? And like you mentioned, it's not just a pile of cash sitting. My favorite definition, there's probably 20 of them. They're all great on their own. But my favorite definition was fulfillment of purpose. So to
Yeah.
me, true abundance is not just, do I have everything I need, but have I done everything that I can do and that I'm here to do?
Yeah.
And to me, the entrepreneurial journey starts out just like you said, often just wanting a reward, right? Wanting whatever that carrot at the end of the tunnel is. And I remember very vividly walking around the SMU campus and thinking, what's my $1 billion idea going to be? And nothing really coming, just sort of this desire to be an entrepreneur, to create something of value, but not knowing what it would be. And I think many people have had this experience that the best thing that you can do is solve your own problem. And often that problem comes out of a deeply painful experience. So I mentioned our kind of cornerstone experience of having a huge loss just weeks after I had proposed to my wife, my now wife. Thankfully, everything worked out, but that was a really painful, on many levels, psychological experience as a man, feeling like I could provide anything for my wife, as a business person, getting taken for that much money. So I love something that Dan says, which is your purpose sits next to the worst thing that ever happened to you, and at least in recent memory, that is the worst thing that's ever happened to us. So, not that you got to go out and seek trauma to start a business, but I will say that the fire, the passion, the energy when things are not going as well as they could, when we've got hard challenges. I mean, we had a transformer, this close to exploding at one of our sites, and we're replacing it right now, faster than probably anybody else could. But that's like a $250,000 what it's going to end up being expense, just so that we can keep offering the best service to people. And that kind of thing can really just mess your day up if you don't have the right reasons for what you're doing. And to me, that personal experience was the fuel, the cornerstone experience that makes all of the hard days possible to navigate with a smile and to keep showing up. And the people that are just out there for a reward at the end of the tunnel, a big exit, a big liquidity event, they get stopped along the way. They don't make it all the way through that journey because the reason, the why is not strong enough.
I could not agree more. And that's one of the things that I think whenever you're really entrenched and engrossed in something that you have found, you've matched your purpose and your mission and that proverbial why with, then all of a sudden you look at it as everything is there is no downside at that point. Everything is education.
Yes.
Everything is growth. Even the setbacks and God knows I've had them. You know that the first company that I purchased that I mentioned to you, back then I was really good at getting that deal done. I was 28 and I didn't have the money to buy a business, and it's a you know, at another time, I'll share the story with you. It was funny. I was on an episode, I got to be on James Altucher's podcast one time, and I just kinda briefly mentioned how I bought this company, and James goes, "Wait a minute. I didn't even know this story. That's like the most important thing you've ever done." I'm like, "I know, James, but that's, I don't know. It's just it happened." And so I went through all of these amazing feats at a young, naive age and thinking I knew way more than I did. But then I exited way too early because I got caught up in it, man. I mean, Beau, the reason I ended up at SMU, I thought, okay, I've mastered the game of entrepreneurship. Now it's time to take it to the next level. I want to be in Highland Park. I want to be doing the deals. I want an office at Old Parkland and doing this. And it wasn't about the mission anymore. And as I look back now at 51 years old, kind of the rearview mirror, I realize the best times of my life, and truly, man, where I felt the wealthiest were those times where I probably had the most financial insecurity, where
Mhm.
every day I would wake up and it was this, all right, let's go slay some dragons, let's go figure this out. And it was purpose driven. And another thing too, before I bought that business and why I came to Tyler, I told you I had no family, no friends here. I'd never sold a house in my life, and here I am buying a real estate company. But what I did know is I had a 2-year-old and 3-year-old daughter that I wanted to raise back here in East Texas. We were living in Houston at the time, and I wanted to be close to church. I wanted to be close. I wanted to be very involved in the community. I wanted to do things like uh, be in the Rotary Club, and I ended up becoming elected to city council and doing. I wanted to do those things, and so it was all these things that had nothing to do with business, and because those things meant so much to me, the struggles of starting out and trying to buy a business I couldn't afford and figure these things out. They were hard. It was never easy, but I had a reason why to get through to the other side of that. And so anyone listening to Beau and I today, if you've got that dream and that ambition, just know, don't dive out there. Don't just think, well, I hate my boss. I hate Fortune 500 companies and I don't want to be in corporate America. So I'm going to go buy some Dippin' Dots franchise and make it work. And just know you've got to have a really, really big why. And another thing too, and I'd like to get your take on this, Beau. One of the things I've realized is I've started because again, I'm significantly older than you, and so I get to mentor a lot of young would-be entrepreneurs. They think they want to get out there, and one of the things too that I think it's okay for people to embrace is that entrepreneurship is not for everyone. It just the idea is sexy, especially with guys like Gary Vaynerchuk. They've made it look really sexy. Even Ryan Serhant now, who he makes it look really sexy. I used to watch Million Dollar Listing New York and then followed Ryan and what he's doing now. It looks sexy, but it's not for everybody. And would you agree with that? That there's some people that the idea is better than the reality?
I think funny enough, this ties back into talking about Bitcoin a little bit
Mhm.
because in entrepreneurship and in Bitcoin, what you are getting is a level of sovereignty and responsibility that most people are either not looking for, not equipped for, don't understand, exactly what it takes. And that's, I think, you just sort of know if you're meant to be an entrepreneur. And it almost feels like I couldn't do anything else.
Mhm.
Um, but it's a level of responsibility that I think most people do not train themselves for, do not want, do not ask for. There's rich rewards for it, just like there's rich rewards for understanding your money and being able to be the sovereign steward of it. But it's a level of responsibility and learning required that most people don't just wake up and say, "Oh, I'm going to go do this," and casually undertake it. And if you do approach it with that attitude, it's usually rife with issues down the road. So they both deserve respect. They both have a psychological profile that I think you have to at least be willing to work toward before
Yeah.
you really can fully integrate it into your life.
100%. All right. Let's get into abundant minds. So I know it didn't, I can't imagine you just decided, well, I'm just going to, I've invested in Bitcoin. Now I'm just going to go create this massive infrastructure for others that want to mine. I'm going to, there's probably a little bit more to the origin story than that. So when do you make, I mean, by the way, the real estate deal, to take a $500,000 lick, especially it sounds like there was some shady business involved or you weren't treated well and how that happened. To come back from that and then to be where you are now, kudos, brother. I don't want to just kind of gloss over that. That's amazing because that
Appreciate
will
it.
just kind of take the wind out of you. But you take your experience in real estate and then you decide, okay, I'm going to completely shift and I'm going to go all in on this other lane. Kind of take us through how that evolves.
So I had been in Bitcoin as just, a passive holder for about 5 years. So I first started buying it in 2015. It wasn't my focus. It was just something interesting on the side. I watched it go way, way up, 2016 and 2017. That was fun. Watched it go down 2018 and 2019. That was less fun. But it was just sort of this thing that I was exposed to and had some learning around. I did not get into mining immediately. I was pretty full time focused on real estate. And what happened was, 2020 changed a lot of things for a lot of people, and for me, it was just a recognition of, I don't understand the mechanics of how the global financial system works as much as I thought, because I'm sitting here, in place in my home, working remotely. My real estate business is still working. I'm still able to run it. For whatever reason, everybody's locked in their homes and all my properties are worth 30% more. And I don't really understand why. And people are out of work and yet the stock market's rallying. So that was sort of a these systems aren't behaving the way that my, engineering classes at SMU taught me a system should behave if it's not functioning the way that it should. And that led me to question, liquidity, the money supply. What are our assets really backed by? Where does the value of real estate and any other asset come from? And that led me to look into our system of debt, our credit based monetary system, to look into inflation, and really just hone back in on what are the fundamental drivers of value. And at the time, a guy named Michael Saylor is coming on the scene. He's the first well articulated billionaire who's talking about putting his corporate treasury in Bitcoin. So I've got some social proof of someone who's thinking along these lines. And to make a long story short, I saw mining as an opportunity to get into Bitcoin in the most advantageous way possible. I, you know, wish I had paid attention more, but I was lucky to have some data center coursework when I was at SMU. And so I had this familiarity with, large scale computing systems running 24/7 that are creating value in all sorts of ways. And that's all Bitcoin mining really is just plugging in computers that are operating on a protocol that are performing work for you and earning this currency called Bitcoin. So they're performing work for the network and then earning that currency. And if you do it well with the same amount of capital as you would go and buy Bitcoin on the market, you can get more Bitcoin if you're mining it because you're getting it at the cost of production. You can think of it like a manufacturing process and getting your goods at the cost of production rather than whatever you're charging for MSRP or what you get it on the market. And so that was attractive to me. The other aspect of it was, okay, I'm in real estate. This is a great wealth building strategy. It's also a well known tax strategy because of depreciation. And if I'm in Bitcoin mining, I actually get to use very similar tax strategies that aren't available if you're just buying Bitcoin on the market. And so I saw it as, okay, this is a way I can take essentially the same mental framework that I think through real estate, where I've got this asset that's cash flowing, that's also doing all these other things that make it optimized when we're working within the tax code that we work in, and it's just transplanting it onto this new industry. So instead of a house, I've got a computer. Instead of rents, I get Bitcoin that's being mined from the network from confirming transactions. And instead of writing off, a single family home over 27 and a half years, I can depreciate a computer 100% year one. So I've got this very interesting vehicle that for whatever reason isn't that popular with people. And that was what led us into, okay, let's buy, some computers, send them to this host. That was our $500,000 error. Or we can call it the founding story as well, since it's all worked out okay in hindsight.
There
Uh,
you go.
and yeah, so I mean, that's the core of it. Is just I saw what I thought was a very interesting way to participate in something I already believed in, but in a, let's call it, a more efficient, more effective way of directing the same energy.
So, okay, I'm a big analogy guy, and it sounds like we kind of took the same approach to business in this regard. I mentioned to you that I purchased a residential real estate brokerage. I didn't have a real estate license. I'd never sold a house in my life. But my mindset at that time was, because I don't have a real estate license, thus a book of business, and I'm going to a new town, I'm going to hedge my bets by buying the whole company, which comes with an office building that I actually leveraged to, I was able to take some seller financing, and they took a second in the loan. So I actually pulled equity out of this building to buy the company. So it helped me actually get the transaction done. But also, I thought, if I'm going to get in this business, this is a way to start to generate cash flow that will pay for the business. It'll pay for this real estate, and then I'll learn the business as I go. It was kind of like a hedging my bets toward this. It sounds to me like that's kind of the mindset you had. It's like, one, there's tax advantages. Two, you are hedging some risk. Although a lot of people from the outside would look at that and be like, holy crap, though, you're taking on so much more infrastructure and so much more capital expense. But really, it sounds to me like you were you're making a pretty conservative play, but it just looked like a big, amazing risk. Is that accurate? Is that kinda am I kinda tracking on kinda your mindset when you were doing that?
You are. At the time, it was not me doing something that felt like, let's just really swing for the fences.
Right.
It was actually a risk off move for me
Yeah.
because my thesis had changed. The fundamental reason why I was building a real estate portfolio and the reason I believed in it shifted for me, and I sensed a more durable value storage in Bitcoin than I did in real estate. And that, if you haven't done your 100 hours of research or whatever it takes for you to see why I believe that, seems crazy. I mean, everybody that I worked with in real estate that I told what I was doing, you're like, why? That's insane. To this day, I mean, one of my favorite coaches, I still keep up with him. He's out of the DFW area. And he's like, I still don't get it, man. I'm really glad that you're successful and it's working out for you, but like it just seems so risky. And that, I think, is part of the message too, is things seem very risky if you don't understand them. But the more your competence and context and ability to see into a situation, the more you can do what other people perceive as incredibly risky and understand that you're actually very protected.
I could not have I've never even thought it through that deeply, but you're exactly right. I went through the same thing. All of my buddies out there in corporate America that, I had a great Fortune 500 gig. All I had to do is keep my nose down and keep doing what I was doing. I would have been a senior executive. And they're all like, "You're going where to do what? Are you kidding me?" And another thing too on that topic again, and when I say these things, Bo, I'm always trying. I'm thinking about that person out there in their car on their walk listening to this that may be thinking about going out on their own. When you're jumping into business, like when you're acquiring a business, I always tell people this: if you want to go buy a business, there is no strict formula. Like, it's not like buying a piece of real estate where there's a certain NOI. If you're buying commercial real estate, there's an NOI, there's a cap rate, very formulaic. And so then it
Mhm.
just becomes a capital raise and, making the numbers make sense. Buying a business, starting a business, you can get away. Now, you can't be stupid, but you can get away with not having all the right pieces just there if you can see the future. And nearly every great business that has ever started, the day those early days didn't make sense to the people that were watching. They're like,
Yeah.
it just doesn't really jive. But if you figure out, hey, and then you've got the one thing that, like, Beau, you knew you had Beau. You had your vision, you had your wife behind you, and you guys knew that you were on a mission bigger than just what you were going to be able to put in a pro forma or in a business plan, and you were able to execute on it. I think that's really important. Now, and one quick question before we start digging into the whole operational side, just kind of like a what is Bitcoin mining and what is cryptocurrency and Bitcoin. Um, Data centers, I get approached a lot about data centers now, a lot of it with the growth of AI. In your former home of Texas, we've got a lot of vacant land, and out here in East Texas, where I am, there is a lot of growth in the data center space. We've got water, we've got land that's relatively inexpensive. So there's a lot of data centers coming up. They're more geared towards AI. Are you able to coexist with computing for AI as well as Bitcoin? Or are you just strictly sticking with Bitcoin mining? Or are you able to pivot to that as well and kind of do like a co-share situation?
So this I think you probably want a short answer, but this is maybe the most intricate question that I could spend a couple hours answering. I'll give you the short version is that we can co-locate with AI and create a lot of benefits for the grid that don't exist if you're just doing AI compute. That's still
Mhm.
very early. The
Okay.
way that I think about our business is we're going after similar resources, but with different profiles. If you think of AI compute really needs redundancy, really needs like perfect uptime. And so the cost to ensure that and the resources that you need are much more robust and much more expensive. You can think of it's usually going to cost you at least a couple million up to maybe 10 million per megawatt to develop AI. Bitcoin mining, don't need perfect uptime, don't need redundancy, don't need fiber, don't need all of these things that you would really want in a traditional data center means that we can build them in very different environments and with way lower cost. Call it like a quarter million up to maybe a million if you're buying gen sets.
Okay.
And so it's a very different profile when you're setting it up. They do coexist and they do kind of balance each other out in certain ways. But at the fundamental core, we're going after the same thing, which is reliable sources of electrons with some sort of networking infrastructure.
Okay. Okay. And then real quick funny story, you'll appreciate this. And this was a number of years ago, still in the infancy of mining, a building here in Tyler, old building, really old office building that some local investors had purchased, and they were leasing it up, and they leased an entire floor to this one company. And every tenant to get people in got electricity
I know where this
included
is going.
with their rent. Yep, it happened. And so they have their racks built, they bring in their servers, and all of a sudden the electric bill just goes through the roof. They're like, "What the hell is going on?" And so the landlord's like, I know that this is in the contract that we give you guys, and it's included, but please help us. And I think that they worked it out, but yeah, dude, that that happened. That
That's
happened.
so
So
funny. The amount of people who have come through and, like they're just sort of in the discovery process or the research process of thinking about mining. And they're like, hey, I have free energy at my apartment or my commercial office or whatever. We're like, okay, technically, yes, you can do this, but I'm just going to tell you it's a terrible idea.
right, right. Yeah. Well, it happened. They worked it out, thank goodness. So, all right. Well, now take us through, man. Okay, here's the time where I said half an hour ago I wanted this to be like cryptocurrency, Bitcoin 101, and I'm going to depend on you to kind of figure out where that starts. But explain to me, and also de- demystify some of it. Like, I'm an investor. I'm
Mhm.
still, most of my assets are either set it and forget it or hard assets, real estate. Not because I'm biased against, oh, this is a passing fad and I'm scared of Bitcoin. I just don't know about it. So explain to me why it makes sense for an investor. Again, not giving investment advice, but why it made sense for you as an
Mhm.
investor. what it is, how you invest in it, how and kind of just Bitcoin, how's it made up? Is it little digital coins? Is it one big coin you get a piece of? All these things. Take it away, man.
All right, I'm gonna ramble for a long time. Please interrupt me when there's a piece that you need to dig deeper on or clarify. The first thing I'll
Deal.
say, I won't spend a ton of time on this, but I will just say there's a huge difference between Bitcoin and the rest of the cryptocurrency sphere. And I wasted too much time looking at the rest of it and really should have spent those early years just focused on Bitcoin. I'm grateful for the learning and what it taught me. But for people who are just sort of like exploring this for the first time, my advice would be ignore everything else. Like just spend your time learning about Bitcoin because it is a truly unique innovation, invention, discovery, however you want to frame it. I mean, it's huge. It's like the discovery of fire or the printing press in how sweeping the impacts of this design are. So that's the first thing. Everything else, if you understand Bitcoin, you'll have a much better lens to look at everything else through. But the
And can you give me
unique
just a little bit of why that is, Bo? Like, what makes it so what makes it superior than the others?
there's there's a lot of reasons. The primary one that I point to probably most often, or the couple that I point to most often, are one, that it's backed by real world energy. And people, if they don't understand why that is the case, might think that's a bad thing. I just want to say that the energy backed nature of this network is what makes it robust and what makes it worth something. And every other network that seeks to sell you on how quickly they can process transactions and how energy efficient they are using marketing to distract you from a fundamental core of network design that makes them less robust. The other thing that I point to is most of these other projects have a CEO or a foundation or some individual or group of individuals who have either, think of like startup allocation, they've got like shares that other people don't get access to, a percentage of the supply. There's usually some sort of launch event or VC backing behind them, and so they function much more like companies than like protocols. And those companies have a very different set of incentives than an open protocol that everybody is meant to use. So I'll just say that Bitcoin is unique because it was launched as an open source software protocol that anybody could participate in from day one. There was no insider allocation, there's no CEO, there's no individual or group of people who can control the network either. And that is what is extremely unique, is that almost every other project has some sort of, like, backdoor is oversimplifying it, but some way of exerting control over the assets that the users have on that network because they are, part of the developer team. Bitcoin's open source. It's spread across hundreds of thousands of individuals' computers that are validating it all the time based on a set of rules. There's no individual or group of people that can do anything that impacts your property rights on the network. So it's as if we invented gold in the digital world, a true bearer asset that if you can custody it properly, nobody has any ability to, uh, you know, remove your property rights or impair them. So that's just like level setting. Bitcoin is totally different than the rest of crypto. If you hear nothing else, please hear that. Um, where do you want to go from there?
Okay, so then it comes to there's probably a lot of questions in that, but just kind of for the sake of time. So I want to know how it's stored. I want to know how it's redeemed. I want to know how and if I can convert it into cash if need be,
Mhm.
or gold, or as some other, hard asset. You're just kind of these things like it's like, and just with backing up a little bit, I love what you said, and this is one of the things where I can get bullish pretty quick on Bitcoin is there's no manipulation of it, unlike central banking, which is, you're going to have Fed policy and you're going to have fiat, policy that's going to determine what your money's worth. That can't happen here. There's the politicians and the regulators can't get their hands and manipulate this as a currency. I love that. I get that. But like, how do I How do I store it? How do I buy it?
Mhm.
And we'll get to the mining, but just from like, and then once I do own it, do I own a piece of something or do I own a whole? Take me are there certain are there is there a finite amount of coins out there now, and therefore that's what they're and how many are there? Just kind of those. I know I said a lot, but just kind of pick anything out of that, and then we'll just kind of chase it.
Yeah. Okay, so in terms of how it's stored, this is a global network that anybody has access to at any time. And to use an analogy, I think this is probably the best analogy I've heard from this. The Bitcoin network functions like a giant glass wall of PO boxes where you can see your assets, you can see other people's assets. Everybody can see what everybody has, even if you can't associate a name to it at any given time. But you
Okay.
only have a key to your PO box. So even though you can see everything on the network and everybody can verify what everybody else has, only you have the set of keys to your PO box to send it somewhere or do something with it. And so that's a kind of core thing to understand. This is just a shared database. And that's all that monetary systems really are. The difference is this one's open source and anybody can verify and validate it. And most others are closed systems that a small group of people get to alter and change. So that's fundamental point number one. Every coin on the network that someone has or has bought was at one point mined. So from day zero, there were zero coins on the network. We already had all the rules in place. The protocol, like you said, we have monetary policy that's decided by people. This monetary policy is just baked into code. It can't be changed. It's 21 million coins is the total supply that will ever exist, of which we've already mined 20 million, and it'll take us another 115 years before we get the last million. So what miners are doing is we're actually supporting this network. You can think of us in an analogy terms as being some mix of like the Visa network and the military, where our job is to help people move value through the network and also protect the network itself from outside attackers. So you can think of us like a cybersecurity force that's also helping you move your money. And for that work that we're performing, we are getting paid by the network in Bitcoin. So in every block of transactions that we're confirming for people, we are getting whatever new Bitcoin is being issued, that new Bitcoin that's being mined up until that 21 million cap. And then we also get transaction fees. So if you say send me $100 worth of Bitcoin to my wallet, you're paying a transaction fee. It might be a couple pennies or a couple bucks, but you are paying fees and those fees go to the miner. So that's how the network supports itself. Um, that is really all the network is at its core. When people talk about buying Bitcoin, that usually means that they're going to an exchange, going to some kind of third party that's not the Bitcoin network itself. They just at some point acquired some Bitcoin and are willing to give it to you for some other asset. But the Bitcoin network itself doesn't handle like USD exchange or anything like that. Those are all done by external networks. And this is an important point because the Bitcoin network itself has never been hacked. Exchanges, third parties, services, institutions, companies on top of it have been hacked. And that's part of why I talk about being self sovereign with your coin is that Bitcoin is a bearer asset in the digital space, which is super unique. It means that you don't have a stock certificate or an IOU. You have, if you have your password, your seed phrase, your 12 words, your signing device, you have the asset itself. It's just an informational asset. It's just like if I had gold in my hand. That is mine. There's no counterparty. It's not sitting in someone's vault somewhere. And when you work with like an exchange, unless you take your funds off of that exchange, you're trusting them to hold on to your funds. And this is things like FTX or Mt. Gox or other huge blowups that have happened throughout the history of this industry where people, lose all of their funds. And it's just because they had a counterparty. And the beauty of Bitcoin is that it is removing as many middlemen and counterparties as possible to give you sovereign control over your money. I'll pause there.
So, okay, I think I'm tracking. The question I have whenever I hear that, which by the way, the large glass with the PO boxes, that was that helped a lot. I get that. What I struggle with, as I do anytime I'm trying to figure out any form of open software, is the protocols.
Mhm.
You have you have your center where you're who's setting the protocols, how is there uniformity on if it's all open source,
Mhm.
how is there uniformity for the security? Like, kinda walk me through and, like, even, like, the exchange, like, whenever somebody requests Bitcoin and transaction fees, are the transaction fees all standard? Do I get a better deal if I go with Abundant Mine? I mean, like, how are some of these protocols set in place and agreed upon?
So when it comes to transaction fees, it's an open fee market. So in any given block, we're the concept of a blockchain started with Bitcoin, and it is because every 10 minutes you're adding a new block of transactions. So if you and I are trying to move money and there's thousands of other people all trying to move money, we're essentially submitting these transactions into a pool, and then they get verified and put into one of these blocks. And when those blocks are verified and found, that's when a miner actually gets paid. And you get into either the next block or say one, a couple days from now, depending on how much you wanted to pay for that transaction. Like if I'm trying to pay you right now to get something done and you need to see final settlement, I might boost that fee so that it's confirmed in the next block. Versus if I'm just like moving money from my checking to my savings account, I don't care if that happens in an hour or, 2 weeks if I don't really need the money. And so it's an open fee market depending on urgency for how quickly you get transactions confirmed. And when you think of an exchange, all they're doing, well, let me back up. On the protocol side, we're all agreeing to use a similar protocol. And there's been different versions of Bitcoin throughout its history. So um, I won't get super deep into this, but the protocol itself was essentially fully baked when it was released. I mean, the core fundamentals, let's say, like the main rule set, the monetary policy, the security protocol was all baked in from the day one release. But over time, we've been able to add functionality, and that's just a process of, like any open source project, some people make commits and some people decide to agree to those commits and run that updated version. So we're on version 30 of the core software. But if there's ever a time where, let's say, you and I disagree with what the software developers are wanting to put into the next version, we just don't use it. You don't upgrade. You're still totally functional using an older version of the software. You could use version 1 today if you really wanted to. You just miss out on a lot of the functionality that's been developed over that period of time. And so we're all operating on the same rule set. And if you branch off and say, well, I like, this way of doing it, I want to have, you know, 3 times the amount of data in each block and I want transactions to go faster, you have every right to do that. But if you change enough about the software, the protocol as it's running, it essentially just becomes a totally different network. You have to get buy-in from a critical mass of people for major changes. That's what we would call either a soft fork or a hard fork, depending on how fundamental those changes are to the rule set. And so the reason Bitcoin is super special at this point is you've got thousands of developers all pointed in the same direction. You have trillions of dollars of capital all pointed in the same direction. You have hundreds of billions of dollars in mining infrastructure all pointed the same direction. And we all have the same aligned incentives to protect the value of this network and all of the work that's gone into it. So even though Bitcoin is just, a few thousand lines of software running on a bunch of computers, it's very challenging to replicate the founding story, the critical mass of people, the capital, all of these things that go into not just building a piece of software, but building a network of people, capital, resources that are all pointed in the same direction.
Okay. Now I'm gonna bring it to kind of the everyday person's, I guess, utility value to it. They wanna invest in it, they wanna add it. Uh, I know a broker-dealer network, I know how that works, on Wall Street. I've got wholesalers selling to the retailers, retailers are selling to Betty and Joe retiree out there through an Edward Jones or something. when it comes to Bitcoin, you see it everywhere, and you see scammers out on Instagram, taking pictures in front of their rented Ferrari and saying that Bitcoin did it all. So kind of
And those are usually
how
crypto people too, by the way. Not
okay,
typic you won't see a lot of, like, true Bitcoin influencers like that.
okay.
You'll see a lot of crypto influencers like that.
Okay, yeah, yeah. So let's say that there's someone that's listening that says, "Okay, I'm gonna study. They're not gonna learn everything in a podcast like that we're having today, but they're like, I want to dig a little deeper. Just fundamentally, what does it look like if I decide, okay, I am ready to invest in Bitcoin? What's it gonna cost? How do I go to where I'm not gonna get ripped off? What does that look like?"
So there's a lot of pieces to it, like anything that we've talked about, but there's a few safe places I would say that are reasonable to get your Bitcoin if you're going to go to an exchange. Most reputable in the Bitcoin only space would be like a Swan Bitcoin or a Bitcoin Well. These are places that encourage you to take self custody rather than keep it on an exchange. Most people would be familiar with like Coinbase or Kraken. Totally fine options. I've used them, but they have their own kind of quirks that make them a little bit less. That we'll just say they peddle a lot of other coins as well, and I think that that's a disservice to investors. So it's really easy to buy. I've taken the mining route personally, and that's what we help people do, because if you do it well, you're putting the same capital in and over the course of time ending up with likely more Bitcoin than if you just bought on day one from an exchange. It also has this side benefit. I think we mentioned it, of being a physical asset. So you've got 100% bonus depreciation when you purchase that miner. And over the long run, what's cool about it is if you're doing it efficiently, you're actually making the asset at production cost. So when we think about like very early people to Bitcoin, very few of the people who have really large stacks actually bought the first Bitcoin they got. They were mining it from very early on. And outside of just the financial benefits, what I'm really passionate about is that I think this is the doorway to you understanding more about the network itself, more about the engineering. And coming from the real estate lens, there's a lot of real estate investors who are curious about this space and for whatever reason are kind of hesitant. I think a lot of it has to do with probably similar to what you feel, Jason, is like it's hard to wrap your hands around something that's non-physical that you've got to, unpack a programming language book to just start to get any sort of idea of how it works. Whereas if you come to, say, one of our site visits in Oregon, you get a chance to see, the electrical infrastructure, the data center itself, the computers. It's a much different connection to this being not just this sort of digital ones and zeros, but there being a real world tie, real world infrastructure that goes into creating the value of this network. And I find that is a really important emotional connection for people to make. I mean, as much as we want to be hyper logical, just reason based investors, there is a very significant emotional component to making good investing decisions over the long term. And I think a true connection to how it all works and why it has value goes, you know, far further than just a few extra hours reading someone's newsletter about it.
So, okay, let me ask you this. All right, putting those pieces together. Let's say we're back in the California gold rush days. Is this again? It may be a terrible analogy, but again, it's how my brain works. So essentially, what you guys have done, you've gone out and you've bought, let's call it the mountain where the gold is. You bought the mountain. That's where the gold is. You've set up the shafts. You've got picks. You've got axes. You've got people keeping the mountain secure. And I've got a choice. Either I can just go out and be, one of these gold rush guys goes and pans in a river or goes and finds some mountain and starts picking my way through, or I can go to the mountain that you own with the infrastructures there where I can start mining for my own gold. And basically you, because you own the mountain, you're going to provide me with infrastructure, safety, security. And by the way, if I actually am able to find some gold, You're going to store it for me. You're going to help me to disperse it whenever you put it on the market, should I decide to. As so essentially, instead of just kind of the Adam Smith, instead of one pen maker making the pen from A to Z, instead now we've got more pen, we got people kind of an assembly line before there was an assembly line making the pieces. So it's much more efficient. And you have the company that has the more efficiency, more security, so that I can go do that instead of having to take the whole thing on myself. And again, I think and it helps me to get my brain wrapped around it, because everything that we're talking about with Bitcoin is the exact same thing as mining for gold. Now, people think because I know gold has a tangible benefit. Okay, really, it's jewelry. The only reason why it's valuable is because of how much of it is versus how much people want it. Right? It's still supply and demand. That's all it is, and the rarity of it. And Bitcoin is the same thing. It's only unique. Its rarity is determined by how much of it is in existence versus how many people want it. Exact same principle. You're not going to go do anything with gold like solve the world's problems. You're just gonna it's a commodity that is in rare supply, same as this. So again, you've bought the mountain or built the mountain in this case so that I don't have to go out there by myself in the wilderness and start picking. Instead, I can go and I've got help, I've got support. Am I kind of thinking about it the right way, Beau?
You got it right. Uh, Gold, and just to double click on that point, I think gold is the best analogy for Bitcoin in many different ways. The mining process, of course, is an analogy to gold mining, because you're just spending energy and resources to go and get this scarce commodity, this scarce asset. And what I think
Right.
people don't really appreciate about gold is, often we'll hear in the Bitcoin space, well, gold has industrial use too. It's used in a bunch of electronics. And what people don't appreciate is that's like 5 to 10% of what gold is used for. 90% or so is just monetary premium. It's just the sense of it being a scarce asset. And so when people want to, argue that Bitcoin has no use case, I point to, well, the only reason gold is valuable is the same thing. It's just a monetary premium placed on its scarcity. And what's cool about Bitcoin is it's essentially money that's built for a digital native world. And
Mhm.
if you don't think that things that are digital have any value, or there's no value that gets created in the digital world, it's going to seem like kind of a funky little invention that has no real use case. But very recently, you're starting to see these agents proliferate. AI agents are starting to really take the world by storm. And what's interesting is, if you ask an agent what it wants to use as money or what it should use as money, and it goes through all the characteristics of like, well, I could use digital dollars, I could set up a bank account, I could use other crypto, I could use Bitcoin, whatever it may be. About 50, I think it was 58% of the time, or 58% of models pick Bitcoin as their preferred way to transact, because it is permissionless. It is a system nobody can control. They don't have to have KYC or identification to set up an account, and it can move at the speed of light, thousands of times a second, even if you want to. And so it is this novel form of transacting and storing value that, for us as people, kind of rewrites the map of how we think of moving that value around. But it's a perfect fit for the world that we're going into. And I think that will only become more apparent as time goes on. I've been talking about it for a couple of years now because I thought it was just a really interesting thing, and it's starting to really proliferate a lot more. But I just say that because if you're coming into this and you're just learning, and this whole industry is like being fed from a fire hose. So I totally get it for people. What I want to impress upon people is, one, this is a system that's being built to map to a future, even if it doesn't really make perfect sense for the way things used to work. It's a better model for how things probably will work in the future. So if you want to learn about where the puck is going, I think that this is important to at least pay attention to, even if you don't spend any meaningful amount of your capital getting an allocation. I think you're just kind of putting your head in the sand if you don't spend some time thinking about it. And the other side of that is kind of even more fundamental, is that specifically in mining, but in Bitcoin generally, you get the opportunity to hold a mirror up to the way that you think things work and get shown a very different reality. And I apply this most directly. I'm working on a book right now. It'll be my first book, but most directly applies to the way that we think about energy and money. And those are two things that we all interact with every single day, totally depend on. You have no money and you have no energy, you're going to be shot straight back to the Stone Age and wonder what happened. And yet we never examine how these things work. And I think that that is a disservice to your future, and that if you just spend, nominal amount of time looking into the fundamentals of these things, you have a better map to reality. And so as much as I think Bitcoin is just the coolest thing in the world, and absolutely can rewrite the lens that you have on the world in many different ways, it's those two specific things that have nothing to do with Bitcoin itself that I think Bitcoin gives you a lens on to navigate more appropriately.
I could not agree more, and I think we're going to be faced with a lot of these philosophical shifts much quicker than people realize. I mean, it took me, to be honest with you, Bo, it took me going to SMU to business school to for the light bulb to really come on and realize that paper currency is nothing more than confidence. It's a psychological play. It has nothing. It has no a $100 bill has no more value than a $1 bill as far as the tangible thing you're holding in your hand. It's all about how much confidence is placed in each one, and for a currency in general. And then when you think about what AI is doing, removing so many of the get up, work a day actions that we do for, widgets and this and that, all that changes. So much of where our world is going is going to be more, um, I don't know. It's going to be in some ways, you feel like with like a Bitcoin, it's not a tangible thing you can hold in your hand, but we're going to be forced to live in this world where the only things that really matter are the most tangible things. We're just going to exchange them in this kind of intangible, untouchable thing. It's weird. I know that it probably doesn't sound right, but it just there's a lot of these things, and then you think about look, when it comes to like globalism, it scares me. I think that,
Mhm.
with what's happened with us trying to bring China in and the downsides of that, there's and just the globalists that want to see us, they want to see basically a global currency, which scares the hell out of some people. It scares the hell out of me. But if I know it's digital based, the powers that be can't manipulate it. I don't care if Beau is in London and I'm in Tyler, Texas. We can exchange quickly and for anything, and we don't have to tell anybody about what we're doing. It's just like, hey, you have something I want. I've got something you want. Let's exchange. I think it's really the only way it works. And I think that, and we saw, you go back to COVID, you saw what was happening with some of these governments debanking people that didn't agree with them politically. There's no better safeguard than a digital currency against that sort of behavior. So those sorts of things, the benefits of it, I get it. And it would be fun, man, if that's what we ought to do sometime on your show or mine, man. We ought to get in a room with some other folks and just have a philosophical conversation, just like a big question, global currency. What does it look like if we did it in today's monetary standards? What would it, if all of a sudden the U.S. Treasury was somehow having to give away some of its sovereignty to abide by the euro's protocols? What does that mean? Whereas if it's a digital currency where euro, dollar, central banks have no place in it. It's just pure economics. What does that look like? And just kind of hash some of that out. I mean, that those are fun conversations.
There's been I mean, there's no way that we unpack all of this, but I think that it should at least be said. There's been a lot of attempts at making these sort of like universal protocols for money that we can all live by. And before Bitcoin, there just wasn't any that was totally fair to every participant or didn't give undue power to one actor. And that's the sort of like chicken and egg problem of creating any sort of monetary standard is what do you base it on? Who starts it? What's a fair launch? And the circumstances around Bitcoin are just so unique, and actually build on ideas that have been around not just for the last couple decades, but I mean, hundreds of years. People like Nikola Tesla and Henry Ford were talking about pure energy backed currencies 100 years ago, and they just didn't have the tools really for it to work. But we live in such an interesting time where we have everything that can make it work, and it didn't come from on high. It didn't come from a government. It came from a quiet corner of the internet, released as an open source protocol that anybody could opt into, and there was no like coercive top down force pushing it on anybody. It's a truly opt-in system, which is, I mean, it's so mind boggling. But what I want to say, just to give people something that we couldn't possibly expound on enough, is that Bitcoin is the first connection of the digital world to the laws of physics in our physical world. And what you're seeing between Bitcoin and AI and the way that things are evolving just all across the board is we've had a digital world, a cyber world that's operated by kind of its own rule set and sort of has these different ways of uh, being navigated than we are comfortable with and familiar with as we navigate human reality. And what you're seeing is Bitcoin is the bridge of energy, real world energy, going into that world and having a rule set in the cyber world that maps to physical reality and obeys the laws of physics. And it's the perfect counterbalance to a world that's increasingly being run more on computing. We're seeing AI make its way from purely digital, purely command line into controlling our computers and doing all the actions in the digital world that a human could do. And very soon, that intelligence makes its way into robotics and things that interact with us in the physical world. And it's this melding of realities that's going to absolutely force people to rewrite the way that they navigate their life. And to me, Bitcoin is so important because it is the perfect bridge and counterbalance to that trend of everything becoming abundant, everything becoming readily available, and needing to find something that is truly scarce and bounded by the laws of physics and energy.
Crazy, dude. It's crazy, man. It's where we're going
I know you
and it's
wanted this to
exciting.
be 101, but sorry, we skipped straight to 501.
Brother, I love it, and I feel like we just scratched the surface, so we may have to have another conversation in the future, and, but before we go, I gotta ask you, how do people follow you? I'm excited about the book. For sure, you've gotta reach back out whenever the book comes out. I wanna help you with that any way I can, so how do people follow your work? And if there's somebody out there that wants to do business with you, if they wanna do, business with, Abundant Minds, how do they find you?
Yeah, if you're curious about mining, interested in potentially getting started or just seeing if it's a fit, abundantminds.com is the website. You can get it on a call with me or a member of my team pretty easily there. Also got lots of educational resources there. If you are just sort of in the I'm curious about this and want to learn more, there's no way you can cover everything you need to cover in an hour-long podcast. So I would say YouTube is probably the best spot. If you just search Abundant Minds, at Abundant Minds is going to be our handle on pretty much every social platform. I would just say YouTube is the richest with, long form content, podcasts, those deeper dives that you don't get when you're just scrolling through Instagram or Twitter or X now.
Perfect, perfect. Beau, this was a blast, man. Thanks for coming on the show. You helped me out a lot. I mean, I'm still the glass wall with the PO boxes. That was big time for me, man. I appreciate it. You were able to explain it to this old East Texas country boy pretty freaking well, dude. I think I've got at least a lot better understanding than I had before we had the conversation on Bitcoin.
I appreciate it, Jason. It was fun.
All right, brother. Well, thanks so much. He's Beau. I'm Jason. We're out. Well, that does it for this episode of The Jason Wright Show. Thank you so much for listening. This has been a Texas Titan Media production. Fourth Wall did the music. And as always, thank you so much for listening. Please consider going out to jasonwrightnow.com and signing up for the Vitruvian Letter. Also, please go out to iTunes. It takes like 30 seconds to just leave us a 5-star rating. It does wonders for the podcast. I would be so grateful. And with that, until we meet again, go crush it and endeavor to improve always in all ways. I'm out.